Great. So I'm going to begin the demonstration now. So we already talked about setting up our page. I'm going to put it back in inches. I know that I'm working with 8.5 by 11. I'm setting my DPI to 300. RGB is good for me. And I'm putting this on landscape instead of portrait. So my page is open. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import an image that I'm going to use as my base. So for a lot of you, this might be a picture that you've taken or a picture that you've taken from your sketchbook or something you've scanned. So for example, I'm going to go into File, Place Embedded, and I've got a picture from my sketchbook a few years ago. So it's going to do the job, but it doesn't absolutely, it's not the best interface to be working with right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply an adjustment layer. So the adjustment layer is the circle. I'm going to go on hue and saturation, and I'm going to turn the saturation way down. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm putting this into grayscale because I don't like the yellow hue on it. I don't need it, especially because I want this to look like a scan. So I can either press this button down to apply it to just that layer, or I can right click this and first I have to rasterize this layer and merge down. So now that initial image is black and white. I'm going to apply a second adjustment layer, and this one's levels. Levels allows you to control the high point, midpoint, and low point points of color on your image. So if I drag the darkest most toggle up, I make all the darks darker. If I bring the lightest most down, I make all the light colors lighter, and then I can play with the mid-tones. So that's one way to start making your work look a little bit more like a scan. You can turn that layer on and off if you want to compare the beginning and the end. So I'm going to merge that down because I know I'm not going to make changes to it in a second. The second thing I'm doing is I'm going to use my selection tool. So using my rectangular marquee tool, I'm selecting the one sketch that I'm going to use. Because as lovely as all of these are, I think this is the most reasonable one to be doing a perspective with today, so we don't need the rest. So I'm selecting it with my rectangular marquee tool, right click, select inverse to select everything else that I don't need, and I'm hitting delete on my keyboard. So I'm going to show you how to initiate your transform tool. So now I've got this image here. I'm clicking it. Make sure that your auto select is on, which means that if you select like a layer using that, it automatically selects the layer on the side. So it should be on as a default. So I've got this selected. I'm hitting Control T on my keyboard, and you can see how immediately the format has changed, and now I've got points of manipulation. So I can make this bigger and smaller like this. In Illustrator, if you don't hold down Shift, it becomes wonky. In Photoshop, if you do hold down Shift, that's how you kind of distort them either vertically or horizontally. So I would keep that in mind. In Photoshop, the default is that it maintains its proportions. So I'm going to make this sketch nice and big to fill up my whole page. And then once I'm done, I've unfortunately got a toolbar on top of the button that I need to click because I'm sharing my screen, but I'm going to hit enter. You would hit a check mark here. And now I've got my image that looks a lot more like a scan. So a couple of things might not be useful for what I'm doing right now, but it could be useful for you in the future. There's a couple of lines and blemishes on this that I don't want. I don't care for. So there's a couple of ways to get rid of it. So because I've turned this into looking like a scan, it's really easy to get rid of lines because it's going to have like a white background for whatever you delete. This would be different if it was different colors. And that's a whole other tutorial. But so one thing I could do is I could take my eraser tool and I could erase those individual aspects just using the eraser tool. Another thing that I could do, I'm hitting Control Z on my keyboard to undo that, is I could use a layer mask. So sorry, Control Y, image, edit, redo. If I used a layer mask, so I've got this layer selected. I haven't selected anything else yet. I'm clicking the layer mask button. So you can see that this white page has now appeared on that layer. Because that page is entirely white, it means you can see all of that layer underneath it. Now, if I were to take my paintbrush in black and paint over an area, it looks like I'm erasing it, but you can see in the layer mask thumbnail that I've painted it black, so it's hidden. The advantage of this is that if I've decided I've erased too much, or if I change my mind later and I want to bring something back, I can switch it and painting it on it with white, bring that image back. That's how the layer mask works. So I'm going to go ahead and take my black paintbrush, and I don't know why I drew these squiggles on the road when I did, but that is one way that I am deleting them. So that is how you use those kind of principles already. Like we've already used the layer mask, the adjustment layer, the selection tool, and the transform tool just to get it to the stage. So I'm going to lower the opacity of this. So that's right here in the layer section. I know in Illustrator it was in properties, but here you click this layer and the option to lower the opacity is right there. I'm also going to create my groups now. So layers in Photoshop are different than layers in Illustrator, because in Illustrator, each shape is its own and can be manipulated afterwards. In Photoshop, it doesn't work like that. If you draw too many things on the same layer in Photoshop, not only are they stuck together, but you can't really move them around without using your selection and your transform tools. So it does not work the same. You have to be even more careful on Photoshop about how you're using your layers. So I'm going to go ahead and create a couple of groups now. Actually, those are layers. A couple of groups. So I hit the thing that looks like a little folder. So the first group I'm creating is called my base, or actually my reference. That's where this is going in, and I'm going to go ahead and lock it by clicking the lock icon. Following that, I'm going to name this layer the sky. Then I'm going to layer it name it background, then ground, then buildings front. So not to be confused with the building in the background. Trees, people. I spelled people wrong. And then actually I don't need this last one. Great. So the reason I put these layers in this order is because I'm working with what goes at the back. So I know that the sky now, when I create it, is always going to be behind the background, and it's always going to be behind the buildings at the front. And so I tend to work from back to front when I am in Illustrator, and I just hide the layers as I go. So I've got my reference here. Now I'm going to import sky. So one thing that I recommend you do is start creating like an archive of the PNGs that you use. I've got one that I've been collecting since first year of my undergrad. So if I go File, Place Embedded, so Place Embedded versus Linked. If you place an image embedded, it means it's like whatever you do to it, it's unaffected to the other by the other files. But if I placed it a linked image, if I changed that image somewhere else, it would update it in my Photoshop, which is almost like we almost never have to use that for this in Photoshop. It's really great in InDesign. But so I always place embedded. And then if I go here into my it's kind of it's in a hard drive, so it's kind of impossible to find it. not cheating, PNG archives. I've got like hundreds and hundreds of pictures here that I've used for perspectives, and they're all in folders. Not all of them, most of them are in folders like sky and trees and furniture and building materials and wetland photography, because I've done a surprising amount of wetlands. So I know that at any point in time, I could go into my sky folder and I just will have a sky to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and place that. I know that everything else is going to come on top of it, so I'm just going to leave that here. And then notice how when I imported that image, it came in as an image and not a raster. I'm going to rasterize that in case I touch it later. Right now, I don't need to though. So I'm going to make sure that's in the right layer, the sky layer. Turn off sky. I don't need it at the moment. Then for the background, if you were working at a site like in Toronto or in Guelph that you're familiar with, and you knew what scenery was in the background, I would recommend you use pictures of that scenery or a picture that you've taken. I did the sketch 3 years ago. I can't remember what building this was. It's more important for this practice that you just understand that there are buildings in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and place a picture of a building that I know I have here, glass box. So now I'm going to show you how to use the polygonal lasso tool to select just what you want. So I'm using it's already here. It's the third one down by polygonal lasso. And I'm going clicking point by point, the building that I like and want to keep. There we go. And then I'm using my right click inverse. You could use a layer mask here. I'm going to use the delete because I know for a fact I'm not going to be using any of that again. So I'm just hitting, because I did not rasterize my layer, when I went to delete it, it says that I could not do this. So I've got to come here, rasterize, and then do it. It's what I mean, like I still forget all the time and I've been using it forever. So the next thing is your transform tools. So we have used scale already. I'm going to show you how to use kind of the more fun ones. So I've hit Control T to bring up this option. And when I right click it, I can now play around with skew, for example. So I can grab a side and skew the building to go in any direction. I don't use this one much. I can use distort. I use distort all the time. It allows you to grab the corners and then kind of create a perspective to it. Now there is a perspective tool. It applies a 1-point perspective to whatever you're doing. I don't use it as much as you think I would. And then finally warp. So warp, we don't need it for this assignment, or not for this demonstration at least, but it applies a grid over the image and then you can manipulate different points of the grid. So you can see how I'm just warping this to be however I want. So this is useful sometimes when you're manipulating shadows or pieces of grass or anything like that. This is a building, don't need it for that. So this is a way that I like it. I'm gonna go ahead and hit enter. And actually, I do want it to be a little bit bigger. Good. It's just for an example. I'm hitting enter. I'm making sure that it's on the right layer. And then I'm going to hide that layer because I don't need it immediately. You could turn them on to check. It's nothing too special right now. Following that is the ground layer. So this is when I'm going to show you how to distort. It's really neat. So a couple of things. You don't have a cache yet or an archive, so you're probably going to look for yourself. So when you're looking for, this is for the tutorial. When you're looking for like paver texture seamless, I would recommend that you look for texture and seamless as those keywords, because then you're going to get a top view or the texture of a material. So I happen to own this one, and I say seamless, and I'll show you in a second why. But seamless basically ensures that if you repeat the image or duplicate it, it doesn't have like a harsh line between it. You can kind of do that forever seamlessly. So I would also avoid watermarks. So look for one that has good resolution that is not watermarks. So this one, does have a good resolution, but there's watermarks all over it. That's going to be obvious when you use it. Also, if it's got watermarks, it means they don't want you to use it. It's not licensable. So look for one that does not have watermarks. This is pretty good, but I've got one downloaded already. So that's something for you to keep in mind, and then save them in an archive under building materials or paving textures or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and place one that I know I have already. Building materials, arrow way to pavement. And then, oh, whoa. I accidentally didn't hit place. There we go. So I'll show you why seamless is important, because I want to put paving over this whole ground. And I know realistically that unless the pavers were huge, it's not going to take this amount of pavers. It's going to need more than that. So I do this all the time. I'm copying and I'm pasting it. You didn't see it because it was on my keyboard. I hit Control C and then Control V after I selected that image in order to copy and paste it. And this is why seamless is so important, because when I did that, now you can't see the line that goes across it. So I'm going to, in my layers section, rasterize these layers. I'm also going to merge them. It's going to make things faster for me. And I'm going to copy and paste it again. And I could do this as much as I needed to do this, depending on the scale. Like I could just keep going. And I might just keep going just for now. Here we go. And then I'm going to merge all of these layers together so that it's just one layer. Now, if I were to just put this on the ground and then cut out the shape around, something would look wrong because the perspective is wrong of verse. Like we know that the ones in the back need to be smaller and the lines need to be coming forward. Like we know we need to apply a perspective. So that's why I'm going to use my distort tool to bring these lines back, open this forward so that it looks something believable. You're going to need to use some critical thinking when you do this to imagine the perspective. I think that's pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave it like this because I know I don't need to apply a layer mask to it right now. The following thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hide this one because I want to apply a different texture here to the roadway. So if I apply a concrete texture that I know that I have, place, I'm going to go ahead and rotate that. There we go. Rasterize layer. I'm going to do the same thing with the distort to make sure that the part in the back is furthest and that it comes up closer towards the front. Now the issue is that that's the wrong shape. Like we know we need it to be curved. So I'm going to hide this layer. Then using my polygonal lasso tool, you could use any selection tool, not any, a lot. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I recommend this one. And I'm going to select out just the pathway of the road. And then I cannot stress this enough. I'm showing you the foundations, but when you do this yourself, you're going to need to be paying lots of attention to detail and kind of going the extra mile as well. I just want to show you how to use these tools in a reasonable amount of time. So I've got that selected. I'm turning my layer back on so I can see it, and I've got that layer selected. And now when I hit my layer mask, it gets rid of everything except what I want you to see. So here's some ground. So I'm going to hide the ground layer and move forward to the front buildings. I already have a brick texture so I'm going to use that. This one. And I'm going to do the exact same thing that I just showed you, except this time I'm not going to talk you through it in the interest of time. Good. Merge layers. And let's do this one more time. Now, this is also important for knowing the scale of your project. So if you know that it's really big, then you know that all these bricks need to be really small. But if you know that the scale is not really big, then all these bricks could be a lot bigger. So it's important that you think about that critically when you are making your perspectives. So there we go. So I actually see that there are 2 walls here. There's kind of one in the background and one in the foreground. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to right click on the layer, duplicate it, and then it literally just duplicates the layer in the exact same position. So it's not quite like copy and paste, which pastes it wherever you click, but it creates this exact same one under it. So I'm going to take the one at the bottom and I'm going to just shrink it using my transform tool. And I'm going to use my distort tool to create the angle of the bottom. We want this to be at least semi-realistic. Hit enter, and then with the one in the foreground, do the same thing. So make sure that all these edges are meeting up. Bring this forward, bring this up if it needs to be. I'm kind of figuring out what the perspective is. I'm hitting enter. Now, when I show you this, I'm going to put them all together. You're not going to be blown away right away. It is the bare bones of what you've done. You've used your selection tools, your layer masks, your not your adjustment layers, your layer masks, your selection tools, and your transform tools to get to this point. But it looks flat, and that's because it is flat. There's no dimension on here yet. There's no shading, there's no colors. That's going to be done using your adjustment tool, your adjustment layers. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways. So let's say we look into this layer called buildings front. Yeah, that's the one we're going to do. We know that the building in the back is probably not going to have the same lighting on it than the building at the front does. So I'm going to click that layer that I'm talking about, and I'm going to open an adjustment layer. And this one's going to be brightness and contrast. And I'm going to turn my brightness down a little bit so you can see how it's being applied to every layer under it. And the one layer that's not under it, which is this building in the foreground, is unaffected. So this could be useful sometimes if it's what you want. It's not what I want. Actually, I don't think it looks so bad. It is what I want. But if I didn't want it, I could turn this on and it just applies it to that section. Then you might say that the building at the front, let's say, you didn't like the color of the bricks, you want it to be a different color. So now I select these, and using my adjustment layers, I'm going to go into hue and saturation. So because I can't stress this enough, this does not work if it's in black and white already. So if you import a black and white image and then you try and use your hue and saturation to give it color, that's not going to work. You need to have color there in order to change the colors. So because this kind of has an orange tint to it, I can take my hue section. I'm going to apply that to just the layer under it. And you can see how I am able to change the colors of this brick. So in my case, I don't want to give it anything wacky. I just want to make it a little bit less orange. So I'm changing the saturation, I'm bringing it down. I could also make it darker or lighter this way. And then if I wanted to and say that I want there to be like a shadow here, but up here it's going to have light coming onto it, I'm going to click that layer again, brightness and contrast, I'm going to turn that brightness down. And then because this is essentially a layer mask, we can see how this is right here. I can take my paintbrush. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than it is. And I'm going to get rid of all of the dark layer that I've applied because I know I want it to be lighter around the edges. And you can see how that is working right here. And I'm applying that to just the layer under it. Great. So a couple more things. I could use these exact same layer masks to create like a border of this pavement. So I think in my original sketch, there's like a little bit of a curve here or a border. So I could select this pavement and using my selection tools, my polygonal lasso tool, select a border. I would recommend you do this with more precision than I am. Then when I hit my curves, for example, this is just another one. I can apply to just that layer that I selected. So it's really useful. So I'm going to go ahead and begin filling this up a little bit with a couple things. So I'm going to introduce, well, first I'm actually going to lower the opacity of this building in the background because I don't think it needs to be as bright as it is. We just need to know that there is a building. Following that, I'm going to show you how to import like trees and people. So let's close these up and bring in some trees. So if you are looking for a tree for your first time, I would recommend going tree PNG or tree vector or something like that. Basically means it doesn't have a background. So they're a little sneaky, and this trick you'll figure out eventually on your own, but I'm just going to show you that if you're on Google and you're looking at like tree PNG, the standard for things not having a background or being transparent is having that little gray grid behind it. But sometimes they're like lying to you, and that little gray grid doesn't mean it's transparent. It means there is an actual gray grid. So if I look here and in the thumbnail, you can see the grid. It means that if I were to click it and put it onto my drawing, it would have the background, which you can get rid of, and I'm going to show you how to get rid of, but it's not ideal. It's not what I'm looking for. So if you want to look for one that's transparent already, look for one that does not have the grid on it. And then when you click it, it appears. That means it is transparent. Now, I've got this one saved already, I believe. I think it's this file here, 2CD. So if I go ahead and place embedded trees 2CD, it's transparent. It doesn't have a background. That saves you a whole lot of time. So let's say that you loved this tree that I imported with the background, and it's actually perfect with what you want to do. You just wish it didn't have a background. There's a couple of ways around this. So you could use your magic wand tool, and it would do a pretty good job of selecting all the gray and white. You would still have to go in, hold down your selection and do it, but it does not a bad job. The problem is if I were to delete that, you would still have all these little bits between the leaves that it can then be time-taking to sit down and get rid of yourself. So one of my favorite tools is called color range. So it also works by selecting colors. So if I were to select this white pixel here, you can see here that all the white pixels are a certain color. Now it works on fuzziness. So it means that if it's got no fuzziness, it's looking for exactly the color that I clicked with no fluidity, no flexibility. It's looking for exactly the color I clicked. So no fuzziness, and it's got just those whites selected. Lots of fuzziness means that it's selecting my white and my soft grays and my light yellows and my light browns and anything that could kind of look like white, which means that it's going to ruin your selection a little bit. So you have to kind of play with it to get it to a point that just the right amount is being selected. And then when I hit delete, right click deselect, there's my transparent tree. It saves a lot of time. And actually it's a really nice looking tree, so I'm glad that we did that. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this tree here in the foreground. And actually I like it enough that I'm gonna get rid of the other tree and we're just gonna use this one. And a couple of things, so I'm using my transform tool to place it. I'm also, this is when you'd think about scale. So if you want this to be like a really huge building, then make your tree small. And if you want this to be a really big building, make your tree big. I mean, a really small building, make your tree big. You're smart, you know what I mean. So I'm gonna go ahead and place that. I'm gonna head and copy and paste it as well. And using my transform tool, I'm just making it smaller as I go and to where I imagine the perspective lines would be. Very good. One thing I might do is I might rotate this tree horizontally so that it doesn't look like the exact copy of the other tree. You could use different trees as well. For the interest of time, I'm using the same one all over, but you could use a different PNG of a different tree every time. And that would help, you know, make things look a little bit better. So then I would make sure that the trees that I have in the foreground in my layers are actually in the foreground. So now the tree in the front is at the front and the tree at the back is at the back. That's what I want. It's kind of flat. So you could use your adjustment layers on one of these, for example, well, you can see the tree that it's affecting to change the color of it at all. That's something you can totally do. You can also apply a shadow to it. So I'm going to click this tree in the background. I'm going to duplicate this layer. So when I was talking about duplicating it so that it's in the exact same spot, this text box comes up, I'm hitting OK. Now there's two of the exact same layer 4 and layer 4 copy. I'm taking the one at the bottom and I'm applying an adjustment layer to it. And that adjustment layer is levels. So when I grab this toggle and bring it all the way down, I'm making that layer black. And by merging it down, it means now that bottom tree is the exact same silhouette, except it's just black completely. So if I hit transform and distort this now, I can create a shadow for my tree. I'm going to make sure that the bases are lined up, that the angle is what I want. So I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to lower the opacity because no shadow is completely opaque. I'm going to lower it to like 50. So I can go ahead and do that with these other ones exactly. So I'm duplicating this layer. Levels, bring that down, merge down, transform or distort. I hit distort on the wrong one. Here we go, distort on the right one. And make sure that I apply the correct opacity, which I said I'm doing 50. So for the interest of your perspective, do this on everything, every person, every tree. If you know there's going to be a shadow, apply shadows where it's relevant. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do that for every person and every tree. I just wanted to show you how it's done. So now I want to place some people in here. So I have a ton of people actually already. And I'm really fond of these two gentlemen on bikes. I think that they would make this look like a lovely perspective. I'm going to shrink them. This is what I'm saying. Think about your scale. How big is the site that you're working with? How big is the bike path that you're working with? Keep that in mind. I'm going to transform them. I'm going to flip them horizontally so that it looks like they're actually following a path. Now, one thing is that it is not recommended when you do perspectives to have your people be completely opaque and like the center of attention for a couple of reasons. They can sometimes cover up aspects of your site that you rather want people to see, or they can distract you from the design. So a couple ways to avoid this is to lower the opacity of the people. So you can make them lighter and transparent, and that works sometimes. Or you can apply a different layer type to it. So this one I didn't have in my this one I didn't talk about in my like 4 principles, but it's also pretty useful. And it's right here when you click on the layer and it says normal at the top, you have the option of applying all these different kind of filters to it. So I'm really partial to divide. I like to apply this kind of like white luminescent person and then change the opacity. You could make them darker. You could do any range of things with this really. Same with the trees. So let's keep these 2 gentlemen like this. I could say I want this tree to have an effect to it so that you can actually see the building in the background. And then let's say that the building in the background, you could apply like an overlay or a transparency or anything like that so that you know that there is a building in the background, that there is a background, but it's not the focus of the study. So these like layer types are also really useful for applying motifs and art to your perspectives. So for example, if I wanted a big mural on this wall here, I would click that wall to make sure that I'm going to put this on the right layer. And I'm going to place embedded, and this is what I did. This is what that cool art page that I had opened was for. It was because I was looking for this lion mural. If you have your own drawing or anything like that, if you know what kind of mural you're putting on a wall, for example, when I did the stuff for the farmers market, they wanted lots of murals. So I used some of my own art and I did this exact same thing. For the tutorial, I just found one on YouTube, not on YouTube, on Google. I'm going to distort it to make sure that it fits the wall as it should. Good. Hit enter. Now, I'm not going to leave it as is. I'm going to apply any one of these. So I will go through it until I find one that's useful. Actually, the multiply looks pretty good because now you can see the texture of the brick under the paint. There's a whole range of different ways that you might be applying this layer. I'm going to apply the multiply, and I'm actually going to lower the opacity just a little bit. So there's an example of how we can also be putting murals on this. So you could, when this is all done, apply an adjustment layer like curves, which, like I said, applies to everything under it. And you could say, you could play around additionally with the tones of your perspective to get it to be how you want. And that's like to apply to everything, not just your like individual layers. So when this is done, I would save this. I would export this. Well, I have to save it as well. I didn't save it this whole time. You need to be saving your work because I've done it a billion times that I've had a perspective and then I've accidentally like my computer crashed or something. So that should have been one of the first thing I did was save it. So I'm saving this as a PNG. I'm hitting export. Let's say I'm saving it under Photoshop tutorials. PS tutorial. Great. And so this would be how I use those principles that I already showed you. I can show you again what they are, which was the selection tools, the transformation tools, the adjustment layers, and the layer mask to get those really good foundations for you to begin putting together perspectives. Nadia has also asked that I show you how to combine files. So I'm going to do that as well. And then I will take any questions as well.